Welcome to this recording of Jedi Tips and Tricks for Tableau Conference on Tour 2014. My name is Eldridge. I'm a strategic sales consultant for Tableau Software based in Melbourne, looking after our customers in Australia. The purpose of this session is to present a number of different scenarios that are going to help equip you to become a Tableau Jedi. That is, somebody who has an intimate understanding of Tableau and how to use all of the features and capabilities to create creative and elegant solutions. This session isn't about showing you how to do incredibly hard table calculations or create crazy complicated visualizations. Often the topics that we cover in these sessions are actually quite subtle techniques designed to help you take advantage of features and capabilities of the product to make developing solutions easier. So for example, there may be scenarios where you could solve the problem by writing a bunch of calculations or leveraging some complex table calcs and so on. But if you think a little out of the box, there are other ways that we can leverage features and capabilities to make solving those problems much simpler and oftentimes much more elegant. Historically, the topics that we've covered in these sessions have often been workarounds around limitations of the product, or maybe ways to extend the product beyond what you might be able to do natively out of the box. And each year, coming up with topics to present in this session becomes more and more difficult. One of the main reasons for this is because our developers do a fantastic job of increasing the capability of our product with each revision. So things which historically might have required us to write calculations or use table calculations could now simply be a right click, putting that same capability, the ability to answer those same complex calculations in the hands of everybody, and giving them a touch of this Jedi capability. So what we want to do today is to work through a number of examples, and at the end of it, hopefully leave you with possibly a couple of techniques or maybe a few ideas of how to go about creating solutions and take those back to your day job. So let's have a look at our first scenario here. So I'm just going to come out of presentation mode. And for this first scenario, we're going to build into this a little gradually. So first of all, what we'd like to do is to create a visualization that shows us the top, let's say the top 5 subcategories based on the total volume of sales. So that's pretty straightforward. We'll take our product subcategory, we'll take our sales. Here's our visualization. Now if we want the top of these, it's always good practice to just sort this information. And here it is. Now we could just eyeball this visually here, but if we wanted to put that in as a filter, for example, we want the top 5 in here, then we could simply take our subcategory, hold down the control key, drag it over to the filters to duplicate it in here, and we could choose to do a top style filter in here, and we'll choose the top 5 and click OK. So there it is. There's our top 5 subcategories for all of our based on total volume of sales. That's great. Now what if we were to take this problem and say, well, okay, that's great, but I'd like to actually know what are the top 5 subcategories for each year, and how does that list change year over year? Well, I have my order date over here. I could very easily grab this and just bring this across here, and now I've got my years with my subcategories in here. But if I look at this, this really doesn't look right. You can see here that the numbers are out of sequence in here, and if we take a closer look, you'll notice that it's actually just the same 5 subcategories repeated in the same order inside the years. Now the reason for this is because this is now a nested dimension over here. All right, so let's simplify this down a little bit, see if we can understand what's going on. So let's take the filters off, and even if we take that off, you can see that these things are not sorted in order, even though we have a sort being applied at the top up here. We can see that. And again, if we take a close look, what we can see is that the subcategories are actually just repeated in the same sequence within each of the years. If I take the years off, you can see that it's actually the same sequence that we looked at before, so that the fields are actually still being sorted by the overall total, and then they're just being split down by the individual years in here. This isn't really what we want to be able to do. we need to do a nested sort. For those of you who've been around for any length of time with Tableau, may know that the approach that we've taken in the past, there's a couple of different ways to do it, but the one that most commonly gets used is to use the index table calculation. So we'd create a calculated field, we'd use index, we'd bring it into the visualization, and then we would have to set the calculation controls for that table calculation. In nested scenarios, it gets a little confusing. So this is one of those examples of where something that's previously been very difficult is now actually very easy. Because one of the things that we've done is in Tableau version 8.1, we now have a simple table calculation for rank here. So I can just choose rank, and now you can see we've got a calculation happening over here. It's still running all the way to 70. So what it's actually doing is doing a rank across the entire table, but we can just grab this and tell it that we want to compute using the product subcategory in here. Now it just ranges from 1 through to 17 in here, and for each year it will repeat, and you can see that we have these different ranks in order here. Now I would like to just sort this, but you can see here that because rank is a table calculation, I don't get the same ranking button or the same sorting button that we get over here. I could use this hover menu to apply a static sort on this, but if the data changed over time, we'd need to reapply this, and it's not really a great solution. So what I can do is, using this ranking function now, leverage a behavior that we know of Tableau when we work with discrete numeric fields. So I can take this field over here, and I'm just going to make a couple of changes, and we'll have a couple of steps in the middle. We just need to ignore those. Where if I change this to be a discrete data element instead of continuous, you can see the color of the pill changes to blue, indicating it's discrete. And if I just move that down in front of the subcategory pill, we can see that now here's our rank of sales, and because it's a discrete numeric, Tableau will automatically sort it into ascending order for us in here. So you can now see that here's our table being sorted really nicely in that rank order. Now we can clean this up a little bit. We can right click and say let's don't show the header, so we take the number away, and if we format the table, we could come in here and just bump up the level for lines, and now we pretty much have the table looking as it did before, but it's sorting in that correct order for us in here. And you'll see that in each year the sequence is different. That's because it's doing a true ranking for us in here. So that's great. But what this shows us so far, well, so before we move on, let's take this one step further. Maybe we still want to be able to restrict this down to just a top N. I just want to see the top 5 products inside each year. Well, again, we could leverage the fact that we have this ranking field over here. Why don't we just use that as our filter? So I can drag this and drop it over here on the filter shelf, but because it's discrete, you can see we get a discrete selector over here. So I could, come in here and just manually choose 1 through 5 like so, but it's not a great solution in here. What would be better is if I can just take this version of the pill. So over here we've got it working as a discrete element. Over here I could pick this pill up and I could use that as a continuous solution. Now you can see we get a different kind of filter, and I could change this to say, well, let's do an at most style of filter, and I'll surface the quick filter for that. And now I've got this little visual utility on the side over here that allows me to just very easily change the filter. And what we're filtering on is the rank. So what I'm now looking at is the top 5 being brought through in here. Very easy for us to do that. We haven't had to create any calculations. It's a very neat way of doing it. All right. So this solution here is great in that it allows me to see what are the top N subcategories in each one of our years in here. What it doesn't do a great job of, though, is allowing us to understand how those trends change over time, and it would certainly become far more complicated if we changed our granularity to anything lower than a year. We'd end up with a very long table. It'd be really hard to understand what was going on. So I'm going to just duplicate this, and we'll make some changes to this visualization here. And I'm going to pause the design here because I want to turn this into something that we call a bump chart or a parallel coordinates chart. Now, in order to do that, I want to have my ranked sum of, so I'll put my years across the top, so my time dimension is going to run across so we can look at a trend. I don't need the absolute value of my sum of sales, but I'm going to take my sum of sales as a discrete element and put it on the rows. We'll take our subcategory, we'll put it on the detail shelf, and we can take this one off. Now, if I click OK, we end up with this kind of view here. As I said, it's called a bump chart or a parallel coordinates plot. And what it's basically showing me is this is the rank. Each line represents an individual product subcategory, so this is paper, and you can see that paper has been very, very consistent. It is the 12th ranked product across all of our years in here. Now, there's a couple of little refinements that we might make to this visualization here. The first is our rank is really running in the wrong direction. So rank number 1 is actually our best product. We'd really like that to be at the top. So that's a pretty simple change that we could make, where we just edit our axis and we'll reverse the flow of this axis in here. So it now runs from top to bottom. So our highest ranked products are now up at the top. Our lowest ranked products are down at the bottom, down here. So in 2011, for example, the number 1 ranked product was office machines. In 2014, it was binder and binder accessories, like so. It's a little hard for us to tell what's going on with this. At the moment, it's not too bad. This is just looking at it in terms of years in here. But the great thing about this bump chart is it makes it possible for us to view this at a much lower level of granularity. So if I change this out to look at this data plotted across quarters, all of a sudden we now get a much busier kind of view being displayed. So how can we make some sense out of this particular visualization? Well, at the moment we've got all of these subcategories being displayed here. Maybe I could take my subcategory, instead of just drawing a line, maybe we'll use that to plot the labels. So that's putting some of the labels onto the chart. It's not great, some of these lines are still unlabeled. I mean, we have the tooltip, so we can always hover over it and understand that, but it really isn't terribly discoverable for us in here. Another approach might be to use subcategory on color, for example. Now, this allows me to actually start to see some of the trends and patterns. And if you've, again, worked with Tableau for long enough, you'll probably know that we have the ability to click on the legend over here and start to use this highlighting technique. We're probably just on the edge of getting to the point of pushing it with color. There are 17 values in here. Really, anything over 20 is probably too many, and I think even that's starting to push it to some extent, so it's difficult to sort of tell them apart in here. So what can we do to make this a little easier to read? So we've got this concept of highlighting. If we could just make this a little bit more immediate in here, that would actually be really helpful in terms of discoverability for our end users, certainly those who are new to Tableau. Well, one of the things that we could possibly do is leverage a capability called actions, and there's a type of action called a highlight action. Now, we could take this and say, well, when I click on something in here, when I select an object, we could highlight this whole line over here. So if I click on something, we'll highlight the whole line. That's great. And maybe what we could even do is take the subcategory, and instead of using color, maybe we'll put that on the label, and we'll tell the label to just show the value for the highlighted. So if I choose that, you can see here that it's showing me whatever it is that I've got highlighted in here. Well, maybe that's great, but it still requires me to know that I have to click on things to make something happen. There's another way of triggering these actions, and that is to use a hover action in here. So I'm going to change this and have a hover action happening. Sorry, let me just check that I went into the right. Let's add a highlight on hover this time. Still doing the same thing for product subcategory, so we get the whole line rather than just a point. And what we can now see is if I just hover, now the tooltip's a little troublesome at this stage here, so let's just take the tooltip away. And now as I hover over these lines, you can see I get the line being highlighted. So it's much more immediate for an end user and just really helps increase the discoverability. Prior to Tableau version 8, we were always a little bit hesitant about recommending the use of hover actions, because certainly when you took the dashboard and published it to Tableau Server, each time you moved the mouse potentially incurred a round trip to the server to redraw the chart. With version 8 and beyond, we've started to use more heavily the concept of browser-side rendering. So these have become far more responsive and far less of a load on Tableau Server. So we can start to introduce them. I'm not suggesting that you use them all the time, but they really are now something that we can start to think about using for these kind of scenarios in here. All right, so let's move on to our second scenario. Now this time I want to look at some information across time. So I'd like to look at my sales across time, and the particular question that I want to ask this time is that I'd like to be able to look at my current year-to-date values and compare them against last year's year-to-date values. And I really just want to track them through to the current month that we're in. So let's start looking at this. I've got my sales data in here and I have my order date. So we'll bring that out. Let's look at the year and we'll drill down to the quarter and down to the month level. So you can see here that we have 3 and a bit. In fact, it's running us up to the current date, which is the 1st of April. So you can see here that we have 3 and a bit years worth of data. Now we want to look at year-to-date values. So that's pretty straightforward. We can create a quick table calculation and do year-to-date. That gives us our sawtooth kind of lines happening in here. It's flat on April because April has just started. And but what I'd like to be able to see is comparing this year versus last year. Well, I can kind of do that on this chart here. Maybe one reaction would be, well, why don't you just take year and put it on the color? And now we can easily compare the current year, not just with the current year and the previous year, but against all years in here. And so that might be a proposal that we could put back, but I have a pedantic customer, they're saying that's not what I want to see. Well, maybe we could take our year and we could show a quick filter. So we just change this to say I only want to see 2013 and 2014. Again, it's showing me that information, but the chart's getting a little bit skewed because the green line from last year continues all the way through, and I really just want to see the current, up to the current month in here. Right, so at this point here, it becomes a little bit complicated, particularly if we wanted to create something dynamic that we don't have to keep changing every time the numbers tick over, or that the data refreshes. So what I'd like to be able to do here is, the one approach would be to create some calculations and have some logic in there that says, well, if it's this year and last year, and maybe have some parameters and work out what month it is, and really start to filter the data at that point. But we have to create some complex calculation logic. Well, I'd like to show a slightly different approach in here. So I'm just going to roll us back a little bit to this view here, where we have the data plotted across time. Now, as I pointed out, we can do this with a calculation, but another way, arguably slightly more elegant, we can use blending to solve this particular problem. So what I'd like to do here is to actually duplicate this particular data source. So here's a copy of Superstore, and I'm just going to rename this, and I'm going to call this is my here is my time, my shifted data, because what I want to be able to do is have one set of data shifted forward a year. Now you can see here that the two data sets are actually linking based on order date, and that's fantastic. I could take my sales down here. Let me just rename this, and this is going to be my sales shifted as well. So I could take that and I could plot that on here, and if I turn this into a where are we? Here's this guy here. Yep. Take this and do a quick table calculation, which is a year-to-date total. You'll see that the two lines are basically on top of each other. I can't see the one or the other. You can just drag this down and you'll see that one's on top. So they're identical at this point here, but we really want to shift one by a year. Well, we can leverage this concept of blending to do this. I'm going to take the original order date and I'm going to rename this, and I'm going to call this the original order date. Now, as soon as I do that, the blending breaks. You can see here that the blending has stopped working at this point on the time series. But if I take my original order date over here and I create a calculated field, and all I want to do here is to create date add, and I'm going to add 1 year to my original order date, and I'm going to call this order date, giving it the name of the previous field. Now when I do this, Tableau automatically links based on type and name. So we're back to having these two data sets linking together. I have an effective blend. But if you look at what's happened, the green line has been shifted forward 1 year. So in each one of these panes, I'm now looking at current year and previous year because they're shifted, they're offset by a year. So we're really starting to see what we want. Now, more importantly than that, I'm now starting to see that happening up here in the end year where I've got last year and this year starting to happen. So I could change these values in here, right? I could take this and say, well, the green value is, let's edit that alias and call that last year, and the blue one, we'll grab this and we'll edit its alias and call that this year. So here are my two values. I could potentially take that measure names and put it on labels in here. Now all I have to do is to create a quick filter on the year, and in this case I could easily turn it into a slider, and now I could just flip backwards and forwards across the years, and in both cases we're now starting to get that behavior that we're looking for, showing us the year to date, and it's actually filtering based on what we want. Really simple, no need to do any a very simple calculation just to time shift that field. But the power of blending, because it works as a left outer join, means that the values for last year stop at April because that's the last month that we have in our primary data source. So a neat kind of approach that we can use to overcome the need for doing some really complicated time series calculations. Now, if you are concerned that what we're doing here is duplicating the data, we're really not. You can see that we're using an extract here. By just duplicating that data connection, I haven't created a second copy of the data extract. I've just created another set of metadata pointing to that data extract in here. So it's not duplicating the size, and it's not increasing the number of cycles that we would need to do a data refresh. It's just giving me another semantic layer view of that data. So a neat kind of approach using a self-blend. All right, let's move on to our third scenario now. Now, as you can see here, I've started to build this solution already. And what we're looking at here is my subcategories and the sales associated with them. And I have a time slider over here on the side. So I can start to change this. And when I let go, the screen redraws. But, one of the things that is less than great about this is I can see here that it runs up to a little under 900,000 over here at the top mark over here. When I move this, you can see that the screen grays out, and when I let it go, it redraws. Okay, now that the top mark is 550. That's great, but I really sort of lose that understanding of what was the original value and kind of what proportion am I now of that original value. So between sort of the graying out of the screen and then sort of the snapping and redrawing of the chart, and losing of that original context, it would be great if we could have some of those capabilities added in. So again, one of the new features that's come into the product lately is this concept of being able to do dynamic redrawing of charts when we work with dynamic field, continuous fields. So at the moment what you're looking at is a single bar over here, which is the grand total. But if I take my order date and just bring that down onto the level of detail, and I choose the continuous order date and choose OK, what you can see is that that bar has now been broken up into a whole bunch of smaller bars, each one of these representing an individual order date in here. Now we could clean up this a little bit by coming to the color over here and turning off those borders. So it looks kind of like we had before, but the great thing about this is that now as I start to move this, you can see that the chart is able to dynamically update itself as I move the filter in here. So this gives me a great way of really having a feeling, so okay, I have to move the filter this far over to get to sort of halfway reduced against the values that we had before. Now, when I let go, it still kind of snaps and redraws in here. We'll tackle that bit in a second, but this is a great way of being able to create this kind of dynamic data redraw. Now, as I said, it only works if we're filtering against a continuous element. If I'd taken this and chosen to display this as a discrete, when I change this, we still have that same old behavior here. So the trick here is to really make sure that we use that, that continuous value in here so we can get this animation effect. Terrific. Now, what I'd also like to be able to do is have in this visualization here, as I move it, I'd still like to have some kind of visual representation to show me what the original value was. So I have that contextual understanding of what the new value is compared to where it started. So again, a great way of doing this would be to use blending. So once again, I'm going to take my superstore and I'm simply going to duplicate it. I'm duplicating it again because I just don't want to use that shifted value down here. Remember, that's time shifted. So I'm going to take this second value over here, and then from it, you can see it's linking on date and subcategory. I'm going to just take my sales value over here, and from my secondary data source, drag it, and we're going to create a dual axis chart. Now when I drop this here, things go a little bit crazy, turns everything into circle plots in here, but I can fix that by just saying, well, we actually want to make sure that everything's a bar, and I want to make sure with the dual axis here that we're going to synchronize these axes together, and we'll take this measure names off the color in here. So what I have are my two axes. And what I'd like to do on my second axis over here is I'll choose a color that's just a little bit fainter than the original. So my secondary axis is on top at the moment, so let's just make sure that we send that to the back. And now as I start to move this, notice they're all still moving together in sequence. So what I want to be able to do here is I just want to make sure that on my secondary data element that I brought in, we're just going to take the order date off. What that means is it'll no longer respond to this change over here. So if I now start to pull this down, you can see here that we're slowly uncovering the bar that was underneath it originally. And if I let go, now you can see here that things are changing a little bit. That's because we've got a sort on this subcategory over here. If I just clear that sort, because what it's doing is it's just changing the sort order based on the new values in here. But if I just change this, you can see things are moving. When I let go, it stays where it was, and I still have that light gray bar indicating what the previous value was. So it's a great way to sort of provide this contextual understanding of what was the original value and what is the new value in here. And the way that we do that is by doing a blend and then selectively decoupling on one of the axes the ability for this dynamic filter to work in here. Let's move on to our next scenario now, and this is a scenario that's relatively common for those of us who work outside those areas where there's really good polygon definition built into Tableau. It happens quite commonly here in Australia. So the plot that we're looking at here at the moment, apart from being wildly technicolor, these are Commonwealth electoral divisions of Australia, and I've downloaded this information from the Australian Bureau of Statistics and run it through a little process which I use Alteryx to do to produce effectively a series of vector points. So it's an outline of each one of these polygons in here. And by then taking that and displaying polygon marks and using these point IDs and polygon IDs, it's kind of like a really big, complicated kids point-to-point puzzle. So you draw around the outside of the polygon like so, and then fill it in with a color. Fantastic. Now, often people say, well, I'd like to actually label these polygons. I can certainly hover over them and get information about it. So this is Lingyari over here, this is Durack, this is O'Connor, but I'd like to have either the name of the electoral division or maybe some metric, some value being associated with it. I want to plot that onto the polygon. Now the problem with that, I've got my my electoral division name here, is that when I drag it out here, you can see that when we have a polygon marker, I can't drop it on the label shelf. It's not highlighted because you can't label a polygon. So how are we going to put a label. And ideally what we want to do is put a label in the middle of the polygon to some extent. So how can we do this? Well, the way that we're working with the data at the moment, I'm using latitude and longitude as dimensions. So that means that they don't aggregate, as you can see up here. But one of the really powerful things about Tableau is we can actually change whether we use a data element as a dimension or as a measure, and we can do that dynamically on the fly. So I can come up here and start to change this logic and say, well, I want to change these from being just a dimension where we will automatically plot a data point for each value in here, but change these to be a measure. And I'm going to choose average as the aggregation. And you'll see here that it changes the to the average of the longitude and to the average of the latitude. Now, it doesn't change the visualization at this point in any conceivable way, and that's because we still, if we look at our level of detail, it's down to the individual point, so the average of one point is going to be that point. But what this now means is we can start to get a little creative, because I can just duplicate this field sideways to get a second copy of this particular chart. Takes a second to redraw, there it is. And then on this second chart over here, change this from being a polygon to being a circle. Now you can start to see we get these data plots happening here. Now this is happening at the polygon ID level. We're going to take polygons off. So now I'm just getting, oops, and I've made some mistakes here because I did that for the all. Let me come back and make sure that I pick my second map to make these changes. So I'm going to change this second map to be a circle. Sorry, my mistake. So we'll change one of these to be a circle, the other one still remains as a polygon, and if I take that off, what I've essentially now got is a point which is going to be plotted at the average of all of the latitudes and longitudes. So if we think about this green area up here, this is Dirac, and we have a corresponding plot over here which is being placed at the average latitude and longitude based on all of the vertices in that particular chart. Now, because this is a circle, we can actually label a circle. So I can put that there. We can start to plot the labels in here, and I can now make these circles quite small. I can change my label so that it sits right on the middle of the circle instead of underneath, like so. And I can even take my circle and make it transparent. So we'll make it completely transparent, so there's no mark actually being plotted, and we'll just see the actual value being displayed, like so. Fantastic. And I have to turn the borders off as well, so they go away, like so. So now I can take this and simply say I want to turn this into a dual axis chart, and it allows me to combine those two things together. Again, just need to change this behavior to take measure names off, and hey presto, there is our chart being displayed. And that's great. We're now able to combine these two things together. You'll see that only some of these values are being displayed at the moment. That's because they're being suppressed because I don't have allow overlapping marks. I don't have that turned on the label. But it's not perfect. It's not great, because if we have a look at this value for Dirac over here, you can see the names right up here on the side. And the reason for that is because if you look at this kind of polygon, there are only very few vertices on these sort of relatively straight lines in the middle here. But the coastline for sort of northwestern Australia is very, very complicated, lots of islands and so on. And so there are far more vertices over here than there are on the right hand side and on the bottom, so the label's being pulled to the top. So maybe average is not the best way to go about doing this. So another way that I think gives us a much better fit in here is to simply find the midpoint in here. So if we find the minimum longitude and the maximum longitude in here, and we divide by 2 to get the midpoint in here, maybe that'll give us a better result. So what I've actually got here is some calculations that do precisely that. I just take the maximum of the latitude and the minimum of the latitude, add them together, divide by 2, that gives me the midpoint in here. So I'm just going to pause this display here, and we'll take our latitude and we'll just replace these values. So instead of the average latitude, we're going to use this calculation, and we'll put this one up here as well. And if I redraw, comes back, and I think we get a much better fit for these. So Dirac is now sort of smack bang in the middle of this over here. We get a much better fit for the way these things are working. Now again, not perfect. We can see this is linearity over here, and if I hover, linearity is actually this orange bit here. Now the reason it's being skewed like this is because of our Cocos and Keeling Islands and Christmas Island out here. In this case here, we can just exclude those. And similarly, we're having the same problem over here on the east coast with Sydney being pulled out probably by, I think this is Norfolk Island over here. So again, we just exclude that, and we're now getting these in. So, you know, it's not perfect. It's still susceptible to some of these skewing kind of effects in here, but I think gives us a much better solution. And again, if we were to start to zoom in on, let's say, metropolitan Melbourne down here, it's really going to do a reasonable job of trying to fit these labels in here. Now, they don't have to be the name. They could be some kind of numeric value being reported at this point. All right, let's move on to our next scenario. Now for this one, I've got a predefined dashboard. You can see at the top, we've got a bar chart, and down below, we've got a map, and it's being driven. They're both linked to this time slider, and so the time slider is good. You know, it's dynamic, it's interactive, it allows me to change this. But one of the challenges is there's a couple of things about this that could be better, right? So first of all, it's very difficult for me to select, you know, an individual week or an individual month, particularly if it spans across a lengthy period of time. So the ability for me to take this and hone this in on a specific period, and then maybe even sort of shift that and compare period 1 and period 2 together, it's very difficult. It's an imprecise kind of selection tool in here. The second thing is that there's absolutely no context around what are the values for this particular area of time in here. So wouldn't it be nice if we had a better way of, you know, a way to create a slightly more insightful kind of time selector? Now, don't get me wrong, the time slider object up here is a great selector, but there are times when maybe we would like to have a slightly different kind of approach. So for this, I'm actually going to try and create some sheets and use them on this dashboard to build another way of looking at our time solution here. So I'm going to create a new sheet, and I am going to call this my years, and I've got my Superstore data over here. I'm going to pick up my order date and plop it over here, so I get a list of years that are being shown in here. And for this, we'll use our profit value in here. So I'm going to take profit, and I'd like to see this as a highlight table, like so. Maybe I'll spin this back around so it runs down. I'll come up here. I don't need the field headings like so. I just really want a simple little table being displayed like this. So each one of my years being displayed, and I can see the sum of profit. Fantastic. So I could use that same kind of approach. So I could take year, and I could duplicate this sheet and create month. So this time, instead of showing year, I just show the months. So here are my months down the side. Maybe you need to widen this out a little bit. So here's my months being displayed, and this one shows me my years in here. Terrific. Now I could create a third one of these, and in this case here we want to get down to being able to show an individual month, so we're going to look at the day level in here. Now when we get to this, it'd be nice to have a kind of little calendar control. So how does a calendar look? Well, a calendar has the day of the week across the top, and it has the weeks down the side. So we'll take our order date and we'll pop this in here, and we'll put our week number down the side. Now at the moment it's showing us a lot of information in here, so I'm just going to quickly come over here. Let's start to assemble a couple of these bits and pieces in here. So I'm going to have my year. Let's put that in here like so. In fact, what I'll actually, let's put a horizontal layout container, and I'm going to put my year in that horizontal layout container so that I can put my month next to it. So these two guys right next to one another, give myself a little bit more space so that we can start to see what's going on. Now you can choose to lay these out in a variety of different ways. Almost there. There we go, that looks good. So here's my year and my month side by side, and I'm going to have my day below it, like so. Now, let me just hide that. We don't need that. So here's my years, my months, and my days down here, and we can start to use these as filters. So I could say I want to use the year as a filter. Widen this out so we can try and lose some of those scroll bars. Let's grab this guy and say let's fit width. There we go. And okay, so I can select on a year, and it's going to filter all of these objects to just be that particular year. Similarly with month, we could say I want to use this one as a filter as well. So then I'll choose, let's say, June. And now you can see our day is now starting to look a little bit more like a calendar. So let's jump back in here and refine this out a little bit. So we generally don't really need to see the week, so I can take this value over here and we'll turn off showing the header. And then I can take this and let's just format this field up here. And there's a feature in Tableau that allows us to just pick the first letter. So we can choose that and we'll get the alignment to be centered for us. So we can see, you know, the period of the week. And what I might actually do is just take my order date, and here on the text, what I'd like to be able to see is the actual day. So one blah 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 like that. And if the last thing I need is my profit, and we'll look at that like this. Again, it's just a little messed up at the moment, so we'll get weeks, weekdays, days on the label, and the sum of profit doesn't need to be on the label, just on the color, like so. There it is. Again, what we might do with our label is just ensure that we center it so it starts to look like this. So now we're starting to get some context around this particular display. Now I can sort of grab down a column, or I can click on a day. I don't really have anything that allows me to grab a whole row though. So maybe one of the things that I'd like to be able to do here is to just create a calculated field. And I'm just going to create a simple calculated field with some sort of little caret in here. So it's going to be my week label. And what I can do is take that week label and pop it in over here. So we now get this little caret being displayed. We can hide that field label. We don't need to see that. And now here's that caret being displayed. So I can click on that to be able to highlight a whole row. And I could fiddle around with the format in here to change the line markers, the row separators and so on. But the one thing that's really annoying to me here is that I get this little sort icon popping up in here, and I really don't want that. I don't want to be able to sort across this in here. Now, there's a neat little trick that we can use at this point here, which is and we saw this happening earlier when we were talking about ranking. And the trick is that we understand that sorting, this kind of automatic sorting, where we get the little icon being displayed here, doesn't appear when we're working with a table calculation. So I can just take my sum of profit over here, and I could pretty much use whatever table calculation I wanted in here. I'm just going to use a running total. It doesn't really matter too much which one you use, because we're still doing this at the level of the day. So the running total is actually just going to be the running total of one day. So if I choose that, it doesn't really change the values being displayed at all. But what it does mean is that that little sort icon is no longer being displayed because it doesn't appear when we're working with a table calculation. So a neat little trick that we can leverage there. I might just want to, again, on this worksheet, clean up some of these tooltips. And now if I come back over here, I can take this and I could say, let's be sure that we fit the width. So here's my calendar, and now when I change from month to month, you'll see the calendar is updating accordingly, showing me the values for that particular week. And then if I selected down here, then again I would be able to take this and say I want to use this as a filter. Now the problem with that is all of a sudden you notice our year and month collapse when we do this, because there's only 1 year and 1 month that meets this particular criteria over here. We don't really want that to happen. We want this to drive the rest of the visualization, but not these. So we can come up here and change some of these actions. These are these automatically generated actions. So from day, we can tell this that we don't want it to target the year and the month sheet. We don't want those to be affected when we change something on day. I can click OK, and now we can pick a month over here, and then I can pick a row, or I can pick a column like so, or I can click on an individual day, and the body of the worksheet is being updated over here, but not these other sheets over here. So I could look at the whole year. I could look at, okay, so again, you know, some of these things are not going to be great. In here, what we really want to be able to do is ensure that over here on our actions, when we do year, when I change something, I just want to, when I clear the selection, I don't want to show all values. I just want to leave the filter as it was previously. And similarly for month over here, we'll leave the filter as it was, and we might also want to just check to make sure that we do it for a single select only, otherwise things get messed up in here as well. So what we can now do is say, right, I want to look at 2013. I'm going to choose April. I get this in here. If I then uncheck April, I don't have to worry about that. I can come back over here. Then I can choose this particular month, or maybe I'll pick January. All right, so this gives us another way of creating a more interesting kind of visualization. Now, as I said, there's nothing wrong with the slider up here. It's a perfectly fine way of selecting it. But with this approach here, we actually get to deliver the ability to target specific days or weeks or certain days, and we have much more contextual information being presented to the end user when we look at this. Okay, so let's move on to our final scenario. Just a quick one, this one. So we have a situation here where I am looking at my product subcategories, and I have a table calculation on my sum of sales where I have a, where's my quick table calculation? We're doing a % of total calculation in here. And you can see here that they're being plotted out. I've got a grand total in here. In fact, let's just turn that total off. And I'm just going to sort these so we can see the data being displayed. Now, I want you to keep an eye on the value for office machines up here at 13. So I've got a filter over here for these subcategories. And if I start to turn things off, so if I turn off bookcases, watch what happens for office machines in here, 13%. If I turn that off, notice it changes, 13.9, 15%. Now, obviously that makes sense because there are less categories, so that particular value is now going to be that particular category is now taking up proportionally more of the total. So what we're seeing here is actually technically correct. But sometimes customers ask us, I want to be able to just filter this down to look at a subset of my subcategories, but I want to be able to see the true percentage value. Now, I know that it's not going to add up to 100. I understand all the risks and implications around that. But as I turn these things off, I don't want this number to change away from 13. How can I do that? Now, this is a little challenging because if you understand the way that Tableau works with a quick filter, and when we do a quick filter, we're actually removing those values from the result set that comes back from the data source. So when I turn off bookcases, those records don't actually come back. So I never really know what that value is. So I can't use a quick filter to do this kind of calculation. So we'll take that away. However, if we understand a little, let's take that thought a little further and say, well, okay, what we really need to be able to do is remove some of these things and not have them affect the calculation. Now we can do that by selecting a bunch of data items over here, like so. Now I can say keep only or exclude, or if I right click on them, there's another option. If I pick one of these guys here, I can say I can either exclude, which means I get rid of it, or I can hide it. Now if I hide this, watch what happens to the value of 13 up here. I choose chairs and chair mats and I hide that. It disappears, but the numbers don't change. So it's doing a post query filter. It's hiding the value in here. So that's great, but it really requires us to be able to right click and do hide, or show that hidden data to bring it back again in here. I really like that idea of the quick filter, but I want it to be able to work post the query. So we need to do a calculation. We need to work with something that happens post query. What do we know that happens at that time? Table calculations are done on the result set that comes back from the underlying database. So if we could somehow make these values over here into a table calculation, maybe we could do something with that. Well, as it turns out, there is actually a way to do that. I put this under the category of things that you'd probably never discover on your own, but once you're taught this technique, it's actually really powerful. Broadly speaking, we refer to this as a dynamic hide. And what I'm going to do is create a calculated field, and it's a little bit complicated. So let's call this my post query subcategory, like so. And I need to turn this into a table calculation. So the way that we can do this is we used this calculation earlier on in this session. We use a calculation called lookup, so lookup basically says look in a particular direction a certain number of steps. So the direction is the compute using, and the number of steps is part of this. So I want to look up, in this case I want to look up the product subcategory, but I want to look up 0 spaces away. Now this isn't working because this needs to be an aggregation, and because it's a string, we can just use the attribute aggregation function in here. So I'm going to look up the subcategory 0 spaces away, which is basically saying look up your own particular value in here. So it's saying look at yourself. I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to just pause my calculation. Let's move the product subcategory down onto the level of detail. We need to do that because we still need the product subcategory to define how we want this to happen. But now I have my post query subcategory on my rows like so, and if I click go, so I still end up with the same kind of view. And if I select all of these data values in here, I can tell it that I want to sort them in a descending order, so the numbers are all still the same as we had before. But now if I take this object and say show a quick filter, what I'm now filtering on is the table calculation rather than the original field. And now if I start to take these fields out, notice that Office Machines is not changing. So we're getting the behavior that we wanted. And the reason for that is because this field, this post query subcategory, is evaluated after we go to the database. And then what we're doing is effectively hiding these values. We've already computed the percentage values, and now we're simply choosing to display or hide elements in this, so I can get that behavior that we were looking at before. So that's it. That's our session for today. Thanks very much for watching this recording. I hope that you were at the session at our customer conference. I hope the session has given you a few tricks and techniques to take away and hopefully make better visualizations with Tableau in your day-to-day work, and help you take a few more steps in really understanding all of the potential that Tableau has for you. So again, thanks for watching.